All right, this is your overview for Chapter 2. Again, remember this isn't a complete list of all the topics, but just some of those things I want to emphasize that students usually have difficulties with. And again, some more study tour pics. This is at the Imperial War Museum in London. Me and a group of UCO students and a couple other professors are posing in front of a piece of the Berlin Wall. So a lot of things have changed in both international politics as well as international business recently. Here's one of my favorite sites in London. This is the cigar room at Harrods department store in downtown London. Again, we all have our own vision of international treasures, and this is one of mine that I enjoy. In Chapter 2, we're talking about the idea of legal application to the business ideas. And we have this concept of public and private international law. Public international law basically means it involves several countries. So treaties, things that are done by the United Nations, NAFTA, those are public international law. In contrast, private international law involves, say, a single country or a single business. For example, McDonald's policy on where they will and will not have franchises is private international law. When we have rules that are developed internationally, it's a little more complicated because we think of you're driving around campus and you get pulled over for speeding. Well, who decided what the speed limit should be? Well, the city of Edmond did through its council and passed regulations on that. And by being a resident of Edmond, you're subject to those. How does it work when you're talking about it in international aspects, international business? How do you know what rules govern you and obligate you? A lot of times these are done through treaties. Treaties are agreements between nations. They can be bilateral, meaning two countries, or multilateral, meaning three or more countries. Again, you can't have a treaty with just one country. There's got to be a partner. There's got to be a combination of nations to make it work. A convention, when you hear that reference, like the Warsaw Convention, the Montreal Convention, those are also shorthand for a treaty. And again, it stems from the same concept. The convention, the meeting of people, is what led to the treaty, the written document. And so a lot of times we use those words interchangeably of the convention and the treaty all reference the same exact concept. These are four of your vocabulary words that we will use over and over again in our discussion of different business treaties. A protocol is an amendment after a treaty. So after you have an established treaty, if you come in and modify part of it, it's called a protocol. Probably the most familiar one you'll have is the Kyoto Protocol, which talks about greenhouse gases. Ratification is basically the idea of your country agreed to be bound by that. And how ratification takes place depends a lot on your individual country's rules as far as adopting a treaty. For example, in America's political scheme, the president agrees and the Senate ratifies it. But each country has their own domestic policy about what procedures they have to go through to ratify or agree to the treaty. Signatories are basically the list of all those nations that have agreed to be bound by the treaty. And last, and very much important, is a reservation. A reservation, again, the book describes it as an exception to the treaty. I think that misses part of it. A reservation is when, at the time you make the original treaty, you agree that you're going to violate the treaty in some specific way. For example, let's suppose America and Canada got together and we're going to eliminate all tariffs between our two countries on products. However, the American Plywood Association lobbies very hard to our Congress to keep tariffs on imported plywood with Canada. And so when we make the treaty with Canada, we sign the treaty and say we'll agree to not have tariffs, but we're reserving the right to keep tariffs on plywood due to those issues. Right? That's a reservation. And it's got to be done at the time you make the original treaty. Another vocabulary term that we'll use over and over again, this idea is the treaty self-executing or not self-executing. Again, this makes a difference of is it really enacted and in force or not. Self-executing means it has all the necessary components in order to effect the treaty. What do I mean by it? Well, consider two simple treaties. Again, we have a treaty with Canada that says we will eliminate all tariffs on milk going between the United States and Canada starting January 1st, 2017. That's self-executing. It describes in detail what is going to be done and when it's going to start. In contrast, a non-self-executing treaty are ones that are vague about one or more of those essential details. For example, the words of some treaties that pop up very often are just, our two countries agree to work together to harmonize our commerce. That's obviously not self-executing. It doesn't really define what's going to happen or when it's going to happen. It's just an agreement to say we're going to work together. Right? Self-executing treaties can be implemented because all the details are there, whereas non-self-executing treaties still require work by Congress and the other countries' Congress to work out the details of when does it start, how detailed is it going to be. We also have sort of international courts. They're not as detailed as we expect in America. We have the International Court of Justice. It only handles cases where one country is suing another country. So where the United States is suing Guatemala, it would handle that case. If McDonald's is suing IBM, it would not handle it, no matter how big the case is. It's only when one country is suing another country. And so its scope of cases are very, very small. One of the other big contrasts that we note in this chapter is talking about our different types of legal systems. We have three primary ones: civil law, common law, and religious law. America, we're a common law country. Again, we get this tradition from England in that basically the difference is for common law, our rules come from both the legislature that draws up the rules and the courts that interpret the rules. In contrast, in a civil law society, which again are very common throughout Europe, France is one of the big civil law countries. In a civil law society, all the power of making the rules is in with the legislature. They do have courts, but they're more functionary. They're more, they do the process, but they don't have a lot of discretion in their decisions. In contrast, the court notes the book notes quite a few of the differences between them. But if you contrast civil law and common law to religious law, for example, it talks about Sharia law. We could do the same thing about talking about Catholic law and the canon law of the Catholic Church, or halacha law from the Jewish faith. Again, religious laws, instead of coming from a legislature or coming from the court system or a combination, instead their authority derives from a primary religious document. Right? For the Catholic Church, it's the Bible. For Sharia law, it's the writings of Prophet Muhammad and the Quran. And for halacha law, it's the Torah. All of these, instead of coming from a legislature or the court system, instead they all stem from a primary religious document. Keep track of these, because there's a lot of vocabulary in this chapter, and it's a lot of vocabulary that will be used over and over again. So literally take these out and practice these with flashcards, because you're going to see these terms about treaties and these different legal systems over and over again. Thank you.